You wanted to learn more about the geography of Nepal, and wow, did you deliver an interesting set of materials for us to dive into. We even have this document written entirely in Nepali script, which looks like it gets into some serious detail on everything from the Himalayas to earthquakes. It even mentions the father of geography, who we might have to do some digging to figure out.
That's right. It'll be interesting to see how Nepali perspectives on geography might differ from what we're used to in the West.
Okay, so before we get lost in translation, let's start with the basics for our listener. Where exactly is Nepal on the map, and what are some of its defining geographical features?
Nepal is a landlocked country nestled in the heart of Asia. It's right up against the Himalayas, with China to the north and India to the south. You could say it's caught between giants.
Caught between giants is right. I can already imagine the incredible views from those mountains. But I'm curious, the Himalayas are obviously a huge part of Nepal, but I wonder if other geographical features played just as big a role in shaping Nepal's identity.
Absolutely. This document actually starts by talking about continents and oceans. It places Nepal firmly in Asia. But then it makes these interesting connections to major oceans: the Pacific, the Atlantic, and then the Indian Ocean. But it doesn't just call it the Indian Ocean. It uses names like the Ocean of Monsoons and the Ocean of Oil.
Hold on. Ocean of Monsoons and Ocean of Oil? What's the story there?
You're right. Those names suggest how Nepalists saw themselves connected to the world. Monsoons were vital to their agriculture. So giving the Indian Ocean that name highlights just how important those weather patterns were. And Ocean of Oil hints at the Middle East. Maybe even ancient trade routes connecting Nepal to that part of the world.
That's fascinating. So even though Nepal is landlocked, it doesn't see itself as isolated. It's connected to these vast oceans, both in terms of weather patterns and potential trade. Now let's talk about those mountains. What else does the document tell us about the Himalayas?
It gets into their role as a natural border, influencing Nepal's climate and culture. But it also goes into detail about the formation of glaciers, using terms like zone of accumulation and zone of ablation.
I have to admit, those terms sound a little intimidating. Can you break those down for us a bit? What do those zones actually mean when it comes to glaciers?
Of course. Imagine a glacier like a bank account. The accumulation zone is where it gets deposits of snow, constantly building up. And the ablation zone is where it extends its ice through melting. So it's this constant cycle of gaining and losing ice that shapes the glacier.
Okay, that's a much easier way to visualize it. So it sounds like these glaciers are in a constant state of flux. But what's their overall impact on Nepal? Are they just pretty scenery, or do they play a bigger role?
They're definitely stunning to look at, but they're also vital to the region's water supply. Sadly, as the document alludes to, climate change is threatening their stability, which could have serious consequences downstream.
That's a sobering thought. It's amazing how these giant, seemingly permanent features of the landscape are actually so vulnerable. Speaking of powerful forces shaping the land, you've probably heard about Nepal's earthquakes.
Yes, Nepal sits in a very seismically active zone. Earthquakes are a fact of life there. The document even mentions a specific one, the 1990 earthquake in Chainpur, which really highlights that reality.
And it sounds like this document goes beyond just mentioning earthquakes. It talks about different types, vertical and horizontal, and even something called isoseismal lines. I'm not going to lie, that one went over my head a bit. What are those exactly?
Think of it like ripples in a pond after you throw a rock in. Isoseismal lines show where the earthquake's ripples were strongest, so you can visualize the impact spreading out from the epicenter. The document mentions them, which shows it's getting into some serious scientific details about earthquakes.
So our mysterious father of geography must have been someone who appreciated a deep dive into the details. But before we get too lost in those details, let's zoom out again. The document also talks about latitude, longitude, and time zones, right?
It does. Those are essential concepts for understanding any place on Earth. And they're especially interesting in Nepal's case, given its unique location.
I'm picturing Nepal high in the Himalayas, and I'm trying to wrap my head around how those concepts actually play out in a place like that. What stands out to you about Nepal's latitude and longitude, for example?
Well, you mentioned Nepal's high altitude.
Yeah.
And latitude plays a key role in its diverse climate zones, which we touched on earlier. You've got everything from tropical lowlands to alpine regions, all thanks to how far north Nepal sits. And because Nepal is landlocked and doesn't have a coastline stretching east to west, it uses a single time zone, even though it covers a decent span of longitude.
So no jet lag when you're traveling across Nepal. Speaking of travel, I have a funny story about time zones. I once tried to schedule a call with someone in Nepal and completely messed up the time difference. Let's just say I woke them up at a very early hour.
It happens to the best of us. But it's a good reminder that understanding these concepts can be really important for everyday life, especially in our increasingly interconnected world.
Definitely. But getting back to Nepal, I'm curious about the impact of its unique geography on the people who live there. We've talked about mountains and glaciers, earthquakes, and even time zones. But I'm wondering about the more intimate features of the landscape, like the valleys, plains, and gorges that make up this country. What kind of insights does the document give us on that front?
You're right, we've been focusing on the grand scale, but zooming in is key too, and you're in luck. Because the document actually dives into different types of landforms found in Nepal, using specific terms that highlight the nuances of the landscape. There's Lesses Sixlof TFN, which might refer to a plain or a plateau, and then JSS FNTFN, which could describe a valley carved by rivers.
Those terms sound so descriptive, almost poetic. It makes me wonder if the father of geography was someone who really appreciated the beauty and diversity of the Nepali landscape.
I think that's a great point. Language can really shape our perception of a place. And it reminds us that geography isn't just about the physical features, it's about how people understand and interact with those features. What really strikes me is how the document uses these terms to highlight specific examples of landforms.
Yeah.
Like, you guessed it, the Gandaki Gorge.
Okay, that gorge is definitely a star of this deep dive, but help our listener picture it. You're standing at the edge of this massive gorge, the deepest in the world. What's it like?
You feel incredibly small, like you're peering into the depths of time itself. This gorge, carved by the Gandaki River, is a testament to the power of erosion over millennia. It's a reminder that the landscapes we see today are the result of incredible forces acting over vast stretches of time.
It's mind-blowing to think about the processes that shape our planet, and it makes me wonder if the father of geography we keep coming back to was someone who dedicated their life to understanding those processes.
I think that's a safe bet. But what's even more interesting is that the document doesn't stop there. It goes on to list all sorts of other landforms found across Nepal, from snow-capped peaks to fertile river valleys. Each one plays a role in shaping the lives of the people who live in and around them.
So we're talking about the fertile plains where agriculture thrives, the high-altitude plateaus where communities have adapted to a life in thin air. It's amazing to see how geography influences every aspect of life in Nepal.
Absolutely. And it's this interconnectedness of land, climate, and people that makes Nepal's geography so fascinating. It's a story that unfolds across towering mountains, raging rivers, and intimate valleys, each playing a role in creating a unique and vibrant tapestry of life.
It sounds like the father of geography had a deep appreciation for that tapestry. But before we get too carried away with our mystery guest, we need to wrap up this deep dive for our listener.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? From those massive glaciers to the depths of the Gandaki Gorge, Nepal's geography is full of surprises, and it all comes back to this idea of interconnectedness.
Yeah, we've seen how the mountains influence the climate, the rivers carve out the land, and all of it creates this incredibly diverse environment where people have adapted and thrived for centuries. It's making me rethink how I see the world, not just as separate features on a map, but as a complex web of relationships.
Exactly. And that's something I think the father of geography would have appreciated. This document isn't just about listing facts and figures, it's about understanding how everything fits together.
So if this mysterious figure were here with us today, what do you think they would want our listener to take away from all of this?
I think they would challenge us to go beyond the superficial. To look at a map of Nepal, yes, but then to imagine the forces that shaped those mountains, the power of the rivers that carved those valleys. They'd want us to see those intricate details, those local terms for landforms, as clues to a deeper understanding of the relationship between people and their environment.
It's like they're giving us a key to unlock a whole new way of seeing the world.
Exactly. And once you have that key, you can unlock the stories of any place, not just Nepal. You can start to see the connections between the land, the climate, the people, and the history that have all come together to create the world we live in.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. So to our listener, we leave you with this challenge. Don't just look at Nepal on a map, experience it. Trace the rivers from their source in the Himalayas. Picture the communities nestled in those high valleys, and imagine the forces that carved out that incredible gorge. And as you explore, remember the wisdom of the father of geography, whose words guided our deep dive. They remind us that geography isn't just facts on a page. It's a living, breathing story of our planet and our place within it.
Beautifully said. And until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the amazing stories